Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back. Getting back into the swing of things myself. You're going to see I'm recording 6 live shows this week. So if you missed this one, try to catch one of the other live shows and you can see all of them or actually hear all of them at bizbookpublishinghub.com. New episodes release every Tuesday and Thursday. And let me introduce this week's show. Ever feel like your book will never be finished? You're not alone. Every author hits that point when they doubt, question, and even want to give up. But pushing through those moments is what separates a dream from reality. Once your book is done, a whole new journey begins, publishing and sharing your message with the world. And this journey doesn't have to be one you take alone. The right strategies, partnerships, and community support can make all the difference in turning your book into a tool that amplifies your business impact. I work with authors to ensure their book reach the readers who need them most and drive meaningful engagement. My strategic book launch program focuses on building connections that matter, conversations, media opportunities, and business growth. If you're ready to take your book to the next level, schedule a complimentary 30-minute book launch brainstorming session at robbiesamuels.com/book launch support. Before we dive into today's session, here's a quick word from our sponsor. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists who will share what it's really like to be a business author. With me today is Bernadette Smith, who wrote Inclusive 360, Proven Solutions for an Equitable Organization, a practical roadmap to help organizations turn good intentions into meaningful action by embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion across every aspect of their operations. And Greg Davis combines personal insights, research, and practical strategies to help readers overcome obstacles, embrace change, and find lasting happiness in life in his book, Checkmate, Tips and Lessons to Help You Make the Right Moves to Achieve Happiness. And lastly, Marcia Dawood empowers readers to create meaningful change and financial growth through angel investing, turning passion into impactful action with accessible tools and insights in her book, Do Good While Doing Well. Invest for change, reap financial rewards, and increase your happiness. Please join me in welcoming Bernadette, Greg, and Marcia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Bernadette, I'm going to kick things over to you. I want to have a sense of who each of you wrote your books for. So who's your intended reader?
The intended reader for Inclusive 360 is an organization's DEI council. So that's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council or Committee. A lot of times organizations have these, even smaller organizations. And actually the book really is for DEI councils within smaller organizations. And these are folks who have cross-functional roles. So they can bring the tactics in the book back to their own individual functions. So it's a really the book is really a great roadmap for them to be able to see how their professional work fits into the scope of DEI. In fact, there's a book series of book club questions in the back of the book, and they're really great conversation starters for these members of a DEI council.
I love it. And we're going to circle back to why you put those in there a little bit later because it's a great way to make sure the information gets shared. Greg, how about you? Who's your book intended for?
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. While the title would indicate it's for chess players, that's not really the case. I use the checkmate more as an analogy of chess to life. And so the book is designed for primarily 20 to 30-year-olds and also even a little bit older. Anybody who's going through issues in their life that may involve change and how they want to become happier. So I talk about career changes. I talk about relationships. I talk about personal finances and how I, as a now 65-year-old man, had prepared myself for retirement. So it's a cornucopia of topics in Checkmate, and that's why the subtitle is more important, Tips and Lessons to Help You Achieve Happiness.
Love it. And Marcia, how about you?
Yeah, I wrote this book for people who want to make change in the world and they just don't know how one person individually can do that. Charity alone is not going to solve all of our world's problems. So we need to work with investing in the types of change that we want to see in the world. So my promise to the reader is that by the time they finish reading the book, that they'll have a path to be able to do good and do well at the same time.
You know, all of your books give me such hope. I think all of your books are very hopeful. They're also about strategy and where to put your time, money, and energy to have a good outcome in the future. You know, you're really here on this panel because of your availability time-wise, but I do see a theme kind of here as well. Marcia, I'm going to stick with you for this moment. I'd love to know when you were first working on the book, before it was written fully and fully published, what metrics were you thinking mattered when you thought about the success of this book?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, books are sold by the author. So, it really has to be the author going out there and talking about the message. And I think to me, the thing that I was really looking for is how can I get the message to as many people as possible? Because my goal really is that people will read the book and then they will go and act and help another entrepreneur or somebody out there who's working on something to make meaningful change. And I guess in some cases, I may never know that happened, and that's okay.
Now, what things can you track? Or is it reviews? Is it people in your inbox? Is it you being asked to speak? Was there anything that over time evolved into something you can keep an eye on?
Yeah, I think it's all that. I've gotten to speak on many different podcasts, and then from that, you get more. And it's kind of like, the evolving thing. The more you do it, the more opportunities you get because people see you, and then they want you to come and speak for them.
That's awesome. And this is your first book, is that right?
This is my first book. Yep.
Awesome. And Greg, is this your first book as well?
It is. Yep.
Excellent. So, I mean, I'm always curious about this for first-time authors, Greg. There's so much we don't know that we don't know in this process.
Sure.
I actually joked early on that I'd have to write books 2 and 3 just for the amount of information that I learned working on book 1. So now I'm going to plant that seed for you. So, Greg, tell me, what were the metrics that you were going to be keeping an eye on to know whether this book had really met your goals that you had for it?
Yeah, great question, Robbie. I think for me, it was a little bit simpler. I wrote this as kind of a bucket list item in my first year of retirement. So I was 63 at the time. So I didn't have too much of lofty goals. Quite honestly, my most basic goal was when I went through this 5-month book writing course that I did through Georgetown University. We had learned that the average book sells about 200 copies, right? So quite honestly, my goal, very basic, it was to sell more than 200 copies. So when I hit 201, I was pretty excited. But yeah, pretty basic goals. But it, as Marcia said, it has led me to some podcasts, which I really enjoyed talking about the book with podcasters, and also getting out there and doing some, real basic book shows and book appearances.
That's awesome. Bernadette, this is not a new space for you. You and I have known each other on and off for, 20 years-ish, maybe more. I don't know. I've lost track. And so you have had a few books under your belt before this one. This one's a little different. You were really focusing on a more corporate space, the DEI space, a little more broad topic compared to what you've done before. What lessons did you learn the first few times that changed how you thought about the success of the book this time?
So this is my 4th book, and I've worked with both traditional publishers and self-publish and hybrid. So I've sort of done the 3 different approaches. And one thing that I learned was that I really needed to put a lot of effort into the marketing. The book was going to be the book. I knew what I wanted to say, but it didn't matter if no one was reading it. So, the first 3 books I sort of let kind of whimper into the world, and I didn't do a lot of self-promotion. So I knew that in order for this next book to do what I wanted it to do, I needed to make myself very uncomfortable when it came to the marketing part. And so that was the primary lesson that I took.
Yeah. And was there something in particular you did differently for the marketing part?
Yeah, I did everything differently. I hired a marketing strategist. I made personal videos and sent probably 150 personal 1-minute videos to people in my network asking for their support. I sent gift boxes out to folks. There was a whole lot that went into the marketing this time, and it was very uncomfortable in the best way. And as a result, I achieved the goals that I set for myself.
So I'm going to come back to Marcia here. This book, it feels like a passion project, but it feels like you also had other goals, it wasn't just like something you needed to write. There was something more than that. Were you clear as the book was being developed how this was going to tie back to a business? Was that something you had in mind, or did it sort of evolve as you were writing it? Like how did that all weave together?
Yeah, well, I'm an angel investor and I started angel investing about 12 years ago. And I got very uncomfortable just watching how difficult it was for entrepreneurs, especially underrepresented entrepreneurs, in order to raise money. And I just thought to myself, why does this have to be so hard?
Mm.
Like, if more people knew about it, then maybe we could get it to be easier for the entrepreneurs to be able to raise, and then they'd be able to go out and create this innovation and change that we want to see in the world. So I thought to myself, how can I tie this all in? And I would talk to people, let's just say, at a dinner or just, friends in the neighborhood. And they would say, that's so interesting that you're helping entrepreneurs and you're an investor. And I would say, yeah, you can do this too. And they'd say, me? No, I can't do that. It's only for the rich and all this. And I just thought, we need to demystify this. We need to actually let people see kind of behind the curtain of what happens when entrepreneurs are out there and trying to make all this amazing change in the world, and get people to realize that they can be a part of it. So many things have changed in the last several years to allow that, but we're not talking about it enough.
Mm. I love that. And for you, was there something else that you can offer? Are you doing mentorship or masterminds or training or programs or, talks or something more than the book?
Yeah, so definitely masterminds, some webinars we've done, really just trying to get people to feel more comfortable so that they can go out and do it. I wrote a workbook also that goes along with the book, so people can go through some exercises. I also find that people have we all have our own relationship with money. So sometimes if you talk about investing and then people talk about, well, that's related to money, and that makes me either uncomfortable or whatever their word is that would go along with that. So I feel like that's something that really needs to be addressed, and that's in the workbook as well. And then really what happened with me as far as the book coming out and the metrics was I saw the metrics on my podcast change dramatically after the book came out. So I have a podcast called The Angel Next Door, doing the same thing, demystifying angel investing. And to be honest with you, the whole thing kind of circles back to your question, Robbie, about I just want to make it easier so that it's not so hard, and I get to partake in that. I get to see the innovation that we want to see in the world. So in a little bit, it's a selfish thing for me, but at the same time, I'm trying to just let people know like it is accessible to them.
It's really awesome. I love that you already had the podcast, now the book feeds back into the podcast, creating, popularity of that. More people hear your message, then they can go get the book and the workbook to figure out how to do it themselves. You're creating an amazing toolkit for them and a pipeline to hear more from you, which can then lead to them hiring you to be part of your masterminds or your community, et cetera. So, because I think that it's also hard to do on your own for the first time, just like writing a book is hard to do on your own for the first time. It sounds like you're really creating a space for people to ask questions and to learn from what others have done, and not just like the one sage advice, like not just from one person. Like you're probably bringing lots of people into the mix. It's awesome. For Greg, it sounds like this really was more of a bucket list item for you as you were approaching retirement and realizing that you actually could retire, unlike a lot of people in their 20s and 30s who are like, what's that word mean? How do you do that? Do you have other offers related to the book, speaking, coaching, anything that you're have been thinking about doing?
Yeah, Robbie, I've gotten, first of all, got a number of podcast invites last year, which I wasn't expecting, quite honestly. I did about 15 or 16 of those, which was really a lot of fun and very informational for the listeners. And then that kind of parlayed into, I did a couple of local college visits where I was able to speak to classes in business-related classes about finances and money in general. And I've really found that audience has really appealed to the book more so than maybe an older audience. People in their 20s and 30s have been heavy in my reviews of the book, and they've loved the fact that I touch on so many topics that they want to know about, relationships. I talk about how I met my wife. It's just really personal stuff that I put in, how I dealt with the loss of 3 family members during the COVID, like 12, 13 months. So I talk about some of those really, deep down feelings that I had that kind of triggered over that period of time. And then the money seems to be a popular topic, for everybody. They want to know how to be better at their personal finances, save some money through budgeting, and also how they put money aside for that long term. You mentioned that word retirement Robbie. Most of us don't even think about that till we're like, what, mid-40s or so. So I think for people in their 20s, 30s, just to start thinking about that, setting up a retirement fund is just a phenomenal start that a lot of us didn't have, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And then lastly, it's parlayed in some really nice freelance writing projects for me for different magazine publications.
I love it. Anytime you publish a book, it just like increases your visibility, makes you perceived as the expert on the topic, and then leads to other opportunities as well. Bernadette, I'm so curious about your shift in your focus. We've never really talked about this. I know you from the LGBT community. You were the first gay wedding planner that I knew of, maybe the first happening, because we were in Massachusetts when that was finally allowed. You were in the forefront of that space. That space got very crowded very quickly. You decided to differentiate and go find yourself a new space. I can't say that where you landed is exactly an open field because there's a lot of people, but you have your own perspective that you can bring. What was that evolution like, and why was the book an important piece of that evolution?
Yeah, well, that's a story. I did have that career for 14 years. I wrote 3 books in that space. I was on the speaking circuit in that space. And ultimately, I burned out for a lot of reasons. One is that my work, I started in Boston, moved to New York City, and my work moved away from being more mission driven to more, 6-figure weddings. And I also got divorced. And so all of that stuff made me sort of a little bit disillusioned about the industry, and I needed to shake things up. So evolving my career from something that was super niche to something that was a little bit more broad was what I call my professional identity crisis that went on, for 3 or 4 years until I really found my footing. But the book was really my way of establishing myself in a new industry with my unique voice and my unique perspective. And so really it was a way of getting over my own imposter syndrome. It was a way of establishing credibility. So there was a lot that I had to sort of push through mentally to get this book out, and for it to have the kind of impact that I knew that it could have. So, any entrepreneur knows that it's not just about business development and your unique selling proposition, but there's so much mindset work that has to go into it. And that's one of the reasons I love talking to other entrepreneurs is that, the mindset work that we have to do to continuously put ourselves out there, because let's face it, there's a lot of rejection.
Yeah. I remember my world of fundraising that I was in the nonprofit world. If you hadn't heard or know recently, you haven't been asking often enough was sort of the phrase. And I took that with me into the world of entrepreneurship. Like if you're feeling comfortable about how much rejection you're getting, you're not putting yourself out there quite enough. Speaking of rejection and hope, I want to talk about reviews, which for me is actually like a really happy topic. And I'm impressed by all 3 of you who have done pretty well in this arena. Greg and Marcia, I want to give you both a shout out. You both have 77 written reviews. And I want to clarify for those listening, there are the ratings, which are the stars. And you don't have to buy a book to leave a rating, and you don't have to write anything. It's a much easier campaign to get a whole bunch of ratings. It's much harder to get written reviews. Incredibly hard. I've done it. I've helped other people do it. It's not a piece of cake. And I think it's really critical to think about who you're getting reviews from so that you're in conversation with your prospects and referral partners and building a pipeline to whatever comes after the book. So one of the things I look at when I look at an author's book to see about their success in this area is the total number of written reviews and also the ratio between the ratings and reviews. And for that, it's going to be, let's see, is this Greg? No, actually, Marcia has 78 ratings and 77 reviews, and Greg has 83 ratings and 77 reviews. Both, by the way, excellent. But Marcia, literally all but one person wrote a review for you.
I'm going to find them.
You can go find them, track that person down. Who is that one person who didn't do it? I'd love to hear a bit about your process for doing this, because most authors hit publish and I don't think they get even more than 10. They get 20, take some effort. And I tell my authors to aim for 50 written reviews because you need a whole process behind it. And if done well, it can also lead to these conversations, which will lead to new media and new revenue opportunities. So, Greg, you retire, you have this passion project, this thing you want to be putting out in the world. What's your process for going and getting reviews and making sure people actually write them?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Robbie, as certainly Bernadette and Marcia know, it's a lot of work. It's an incredible amount of work. I mean, I couldn't imagine. I was retired and was able to do this, but I really reached out to a lot of people who had interest in the book, either through LinkedIn was my primary venue, and also a little bit on Instagram, which I'm kind of new to. So anybody that reached out and said they had an interest in the book, I would reach out to them personally and say, hey, here's the key concepts of the book, but I really need you to write a review for me. I'd really appreciate it. I've also used other authors as sort of an exchange program, right? We write reviews for each other. And sort of like what you did, Robbie, with the Black Friday promotion, which was really a lot of fun. So I've had a chance, I think, in the last year and a half to read, 50 some books that I've done, reviews of their books in exchange for review for mine. So that's helped me, but really, I think it's the personal linkage to the reader that really gets you the review. I'm anxious to hear how Marcia got the 90-some% of actual reviews written though.
Marcia, what's your trade secrets?
Well, I was lucky enough to be on Robbie's book launch team for Breakout Boredom. So I learned a lot from being on that team, and I was probably right around the time that I was starting to write my book. So I was paying really close attention because I was like, oh, I don't know anything about this. And Robbie did just such an amazing job, and just all of the communications that came to me as part of the book launch team and all of that. So I thought to myself, I think I need to do this whole book launch thing. So I just started to collect a bunch of emails of people that I knew. And I would ask people along the way as I was writing the book, would you be on the book launch team? And for the most part, when you ask people, they're like, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to. And on that day is really the day that you can get people to do almost anything. I mean, they'll write a review, they'll buy the book at 99 cents, they'll put something up on social media if you ask and you give them a lot of very, very clear direction. And I felt that on book launch day, I probably got, in the first week, I had 50 of the reviews. And that was from the 400 people that were on my book launch team. And then from there, I kept getting a little bit more. And then, of course, Robbie, your Black Friday thing was very, very helpful. And I got to meet a lot of other authors, and I got to read a lot of really cool books because I couldn't help myself. I was like, all these books are 99 cents on. I would be like, buy, and I got to meet all kinds of different authors and see about what they were writing about.
Yeah, the goal of the Kindle cross-promotion campaign wasn't really reviews when it got started, but it's true that authors know the effort that's needed to get reviews and are willing to do it. So we had kind of that low commitment of, buy 5 books and write 5 reviews if you want, optionally. And most people offer to do it. And I'm actually looking at your most recent reviews for all 3 of your books, and I'm seeing some common names from people who bought books. So Michael Neese, I want to give a shout out because Michael Neese is popping in. And multiple people, by the way, are writing for all of you these long reviews. I always say 2 or 3 sentences is really all you need, but it's lovely when people feel so motivated to write multiple paragraphs, or at least one long paragraph. That's awesome. Bernadette, you went a different tact. I remember I was a recipient of one of those boxes that you shipped out, and I remember thinking, why was I the target? So I'm kind of curious how you decided it was almost more of a PR plan than a reviews focused plan. And what did you think of the results of it afterwards?
So one of my goals when I wrote the book was to get over my imposter syndrome and to, kind of rebrand myself officially. And then also to become an Amazon bestseller. And so this was really part of the strategy from the launch strategist that I hired, was about getting out the gift boxes. And so my launch team, a lot of the people on my launch team, including you, received the gift boxes. And then, a number of them took photos, shared that on social media, and that became part of, the campaign around building buzz. There were a lot of early pre-orders of the book. So it was, you know, an Amazon bestseller before it was even out. So that was really what my, you know, my goal was having that, being able to say, you know, best-selling author. So that was more it than the reviews. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things I've been demystifying for authors, this is a little bit what Marcia talks about in her lane. For my lane, I think about the longevity of these strategies. So even when you said bestseller, for those who aren't listening or not watching, you quoted it because we all know there's a difference between bestseller on Amazon in a category or two and a bestseller like New York Times. I always bring up the book Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones. It's been published, I don't even know, 3.5 million copies, 17 different languages. Like, I have hit #1 in 30 different categories across 4 countries, which is notable. But it's not it's not the same thing as what Phil did. And so I always caution people to be wary of people who are selling these bestseller campaign strategies, because for one, in most categories, in most instances, you can find a category you can hit #1 in with like less than 20 books being sold in a couple of days. So not hard to do, which is partly why I think it has less credibility. The reviews also stay on the book sales page for much longer. Those orange ribbons are there and gone, sometimes in as little as an hour. So it's hard though, because first time authors or people who are trying to really take this information and put it out in a big way will absolutely find someone who will take their money and like sell them a solution. My solution is really lean into your existing network, because that's where I think you're going to get a lot of good opportunities going forward. And I look forward, Bernadette, to your next book and helping you with that one. I would love to hear, Bernadette, about, you said you wrote these questions for book clubs. I'm curious about what other little tools or tidbits you have in the book that direct people to kind of opt into your email list, get some resources from you, implement the book content and strategies in some way. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts for that.
Yeah, there are a few different, you know, call to action pop out boxes in the book that direct folks to my newsletter. You know, essentially so I have a weekly newsletter. I've been writing it for 5 years, and I have a podcast that goes along with it. And it's all about celebrating good vibes and DEI, the things that are going right, and how we can do more of that, and inspiring from a place of aspiration rather than fear. And so that's really the vision of the book. And so and my whole brand. And so the book sort of takes so many of the stories from the newsletter. And so, yes, there's some call to actions in the book to subscribe to the newsletter. At the end of each chapter, there's a series of action steps. Sometimes they're readings, sometimes they're things that they can do, you know, with our firm, but basically ways that they can take further action. So really, I'm trying to give folks, you know, I'm a relentlessly practical and also idealistic person. I'm kind of a strong combo of both. And so I'm really trying to give folks tools to get into action, because when it comes to DEI, there are so many excuses to not do the work. And I wanted to write a book that was going to take away those excuses and just be relentlessly pragmatic. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of different calls to action and ways for folks to sort of engage with me and my work and my firm beyond just the book.
That's awesome. I love having all that woven in, and it helps people put it into action. Greg, when you were writing your book, you probably couldn't foresee what was possible beyond the book, because it wasn't, you know, you hadn't built the business yet. But you have been invited to speak and do podcasting and that kind of thing. Is there anything in the book that helps people find you? Email addresses, LinkedIn, call to action, you know, anything like that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, Robbie, being a first book, I wasn't too thinking forward like that. I really just got the book out, and it was work. It took me 15 months to get it from A to Z, which I was happy with, but I didn't really think about the next steps. I mean, if I were to write another book, which is doubtful at my age, one might be enough. But I think I would certainly go through somebody like you who could, you know, have a whole platform that I could follow, because I really felt that a lot of times I was kind of out on the island doing this by myself. But I'm very pleased. I mean, the book has gotten, you know, good reviews, and it has led to some requests for some other things, such as doing YouTube videos here in 2025 on personal finance topics. as well as maybe even doing an online course.
I
So
feel like you're accidentally becoming an entrepreneur.
yeah, accidentally as a retiree. So I'm not sure how
I
that all
mean,
works, but we'll figure it out.
in the world of retirees, there's plenty of people who are actually entrepreneurs. They don't
Okay,
call
there you go.
themselves
Gotcha.
retirees. Also, I have multiple people in my monthly group that are in their 80s who have
Oh,
books
wow.
coming out. So keep going.
Impressive. Okay. I'm a
Keep going.
youngster.
Yeah. And Marcia, you ended up with a companion workbook. Is that content that was in the book itself that you pulled out, or is it separate content? Like what's in the book that guides people to your company? Just kind of, how do you kind of design that?
So in the book, there's 5 different exercises, and then the book points people to my website where they can download a 1-page worksheet. I call it a Halo strategy worksheet, where they can figure out what their strategy is in order to do good and do well. But the workbook started with, well, why don't I just pull this out? Because I'd also heard there could be trolls on Amazon who will AI bots that will make a workbook, try to call it theirs and put your name on it, and it would be kind of messy. So I thought, okay, well, I could do this. So the first draft of the workbook was not very workbooky. It just had some exercises. It had a picture of a copy of the worksheet. But then I decided, well, wait a minute. I think I need to make it so that it's more action oriented, so that by the time they finish doing the exercises in the workbook, they'll actually feel like they could go and help an entrepreneur, not necessarily with money. If they wanted to do it that way, that's great. That's really what the book is a lot about, but also helping with your time, your expertise, your networks, that type of thing. And so the first section of the book is about the money mindset. Second section is actually seeing what a company pitch looks like. And the third are exercises to get them to do things, including a mock portfolio where they can take $2,500 of play money in their mind, and they could put together a portfolio off of equity crowdfunding sites.
I mean, this is so cool. I have to tell you, every time I talk to you, I think, why haven't I done this yet? I'm definitely like, every time I'm reminded of your book, please keep putting your book in the campaign, because I feel like more and more people need to know they can do this. Also, you just said $2,500, which I know that's like a lot of money, and also not at all, like
Right.
in the scheme of things. But what a cool idea to like have the goal of investing a little bit every year into these bigger projects, the change we want to see in the world, I might say. Greg, in a moment, I'm going to come back to you after this quick ad. I'm going to ask you for the advice you have for someone who's writing a book to help them grow a business. It could be something we've already touched on. Here is a quick word from our sponsor. All right, Greg, lay it on us. What advice do you have for someone who's writing a book to help them grow a business?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest fallacies that I probably had in writing my book was not knowing the marketing side of the business, not knowing how much work was involved in that, and that it's hard to do by yourself. So my best advice is certainly use a team. Use a team such as yourself, Robbie, somebody who's done this a lot of times and been very successful at it, and use kind of a team approach to that, because it's hard. I can just tell you, as an individual, self author, it's hard to do this as one person. And I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and social media trying to push the book and get some, speaking engagements and so forth. But I think having a team around you would be the best advice I could give anybody. It's just so much easier to attack it from that angle.
Yeah, I've often heard people talk about writing a book as like running a marathon, except that it's really more of a triathlon, because when you run a marathon, you're done. Like you finish the marathon. Here, it's like you do the first swim, you're standing there soaking wet, feeling exhilarated, and then you're like, oh, I got to get on a bike now and then run a marathon. Like, for some people, it's like the Ironman triathlon. It's even bigger than that. So
I would say, and to that point, Robbie, I would say people ask me all the time, what was the hardest thing about writing a book? And I said, quite honestly, the marketing. And the writing the book was actually easier for me than the marketing aspect of it. And that's something I did not know going into the endeavor back in 2022.
I'm seeing everyone else nodding along. Marcia, let me come over to you. What's the advice you'd share with someone running a book to help them grow a business?
Well, before I started writing a book or really knowing anything about this, I thought, well, if you put things in the book, you shouldn't necessarily put it on your website or on social media, or like, you should kind of be protective so that people will then want to buy the book. But I've actually found that that's really the opposite. And you used, Phil Jones as an example. I think he puts almost everything that's in all of his stuff. He almost gives it away for free. And that just makes more people want to hear what he has to say in all the platforms. So I think he actually sells more books because he has put so much out there for people to take advantage of. So that to me was kind of an aha moment, that like the more that you give to people, the more that they're going to want, and the more that they will feel your generosity, and then they'll be generous back to you.
So really, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I do feel like there's a scarcity feeling people have, a preciousness they have about their content at first.
Right.
They worry about putting it out there, or they don't want to. I also know sometimes this leads to people not sharing that they're writing a book, because they don't want anyone to know that they're working on it. They don't want anyone else to steal their idea.
Right.
But there's no way anyone could write the same book that any of us wrote. Like, even if it's on our topic, it's our book, it's our perspective, it's our experience. And it's hard because if you don't talk about the book while you're writing it, you're starting this marketing piece from a standstill, and you're shouting into like the darkness, and nobody knows that who you are or what the book's about or cares. So yes, not being precious, even while you're writing the book, putting out some pieces of content which might help you workshop the content. I ran workshops actually. I did pop-up masterminds where I had people try the exercises in one of my books in order, and they paid me, by the way. They paid me to go through these pop-up masterminds and gave me back the feedback I ended up needing to really make the workbook stand on its own, the content stand on its own. Because it's one thing to give people exercises when you're the coach and you're standing next to them teaching them something, and another to like put it out in the universe and hope people can understand your point. You're like, this is what I meant. You didn't get that? Bernadette, let me come over to you. I've already heard a little bit of the lessons you've been learning along the way, but now I'm curious, what lessons do you want to share with others?
Yeah, I think I've talked enough about the marketing piece. I would say make sure you get out of your own way. I touched a little bit on the mindset work, but I think that it's really important to make sure that you have a lot of support, people cheering you on, that you don't stay in your head. So whether that's a network of other authors going through the same thing, other entrepreneurs going through the same thing, people on your team, whatever it happens to be, this work can be lonely, and we can very much isolate ourselves when we're sort of head down in the writing process and get stuck in our heads. But I think the big advice, and that's certainly been my experience. And so I would say, my big advice is to open yourself up for support, welcome that in, allow yourself to be loved, and ask for it, and be generous in giving it back. So I think that's just going to be, a good life lesson, certainly a good book publishing lesson as well.
It's true that a lot of the things that you don't know initially, if you're in an author community, you start to learn things you didn't even know to ask about. People will kind of point things out to you or warn you against something or give you some questions that you can ask the vendors you're hiring. So that I actually worked with an author on their launch who's published by a publisher who generally publishes fiction, and she had done all this research, and she found a publisher, and that's all she knew about them was that they publish books, and they said, sure, we'll publish your book. They 3 times edited direct quotes from her research, and they had to go back and forth and back and forth. And like, that wouldn't happen if you hired a company that was familiar with that format, with that style of writing, understood what the goal was for that writing, that this was research and nonfiction. And she's like, I didn't know I wasted so much money and time trying to get this done and done right. And in the end, she's proud of the product, but it could have been a simpler process. And if she was working with the right kind of publisher, they would have also introduced her to the kinds of people that she would need to know for the marketing. So it is interesting. You kind of have to find your way in, which is one of the reasons I love that we created this BizBook Publishing Hub. It's not just this podcast, but there's a community of experts who work with entrepreneurs to help them become successful authors. And I host events throughout the year for authors and speakers to meet each other and to connect, because I do think, like you said, that community piece is so crucial. I appreciate everything you've all shared here. And now I'm going to ask you to share how people can find you and follow your work. I'm going to start with Bernadette.
You can find me on bernadettesmith.com, and I'm very easily Googleable. Don't confuse me with the matchmaker or the Michigan Republican Party chair. or something like that.
No.
But find me very easily on Google or at bernadettesmith.com.
Fantastic. By the way, all these links are going to be in the show notes at bizbookpublishinghub.com. Greg, how can people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, I have a website out there. It's davischeckmate.com. You can reach me there through LinkedIn or even Instagram as well.
Brilliant. And what about you, Marcia?
Great. Yeah, same. MarciaDawood.com. And Marcia Dawood. I got lucky. I married a guy who's Pakistani, and so I got a American first name and a Pakistani last name. And so there aren't very many other Marcia Dawoods in the world. So pretty Googleable.
That's awesome. I'm going to put links to your books, your podcasts, for those of you that have podcasts, your LinkedIn, Instagram, what all that stuff, YouTube's, all of that will be available in the show notes at bizbookpublishinghub.com, which is also where you'll find all of these experts, the events that I host throughout the year. You'll get to learn about the Kindle cross promotion campaigns. They'll be running them 3 a year going forward. So those are a great opportunity if you're an author to market your book. And if you're a reader of these kinds of books, to buy a lot of them for $1 a piece or less. Look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much for joining us, friends. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Take care. Happy New Year.
Robbie.